The moment I stepped into that courtroom, my daughter let out a quiet, mocking laugh as if I were already defeated. Her husband didn't even bother hiding his contempt. He just shook his head slowly like I was some confused old woman who had no idea why she was there. But I knew exactly why I was there. What they didn't know was that I had spent the last 3 months preparing for this moment. And by the time the truth came out, that little laugh of hers would be the last time she ever underestimated me. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, especially family, please take a moment to like this video, and if my story speaks to you, subscribe and stay with me. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. Before everything fell apart, my life was quiet. Not lonely, just quiet in a way that felt earned. My name is Elizabeth Moore. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life I believed that if you worked hard, loved your family, and stayed honest, things would somehow turn out right in the end. Maybe not perfect, but right enough to sleep at night without regret. I had spent over 30 years working as an office manager at a dental clinic in Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady and I was good at it. I knew every patient by name, remembered birthdays, kept the books balanced to the last cent. My husband Thomas used to joke that if the whole world collapsed, I'd still have a neat filing system for it. Thomas passed away 10 years ago. Even now, saying that still feels like pressing on a bruise that never fully healed. He had a heart condition we thought we were managing. One morning, he just didn't wake up. No warning, no goodbye, just silence where his breathing used to be. After the funeral, the house felt enormous. Too quiet, too still. But I stayed. That house wasn't just a building. It was where we raised our daughter, where Thomas planted the oak tree in the backyard the year Lauren was born, where we celebrated birthdays, argued over trivial things, made up again, lived a whole life in small, ordinary moments. So I stayed and I built a routine, morning coffee by the kitchen window, watering the plants, reading the newspaper from front to back. Sometimes I'd sit in Thomas's old chair and talk to him out loud, just to hear a voice in the room, even if it was my own. And then there was Lauren. My daughter used to call me every other day, sometimes every day if something interesting happened. She'd tell me about work, about her friends, about the ridiculous things people said in meetings. We used to laugh a lot. When she was younger, Lauren had a softness to her. A kind of open-hearted warmth that made people trust her instantly. Even as a child, she'd bring home stray animals, defend kids who were bullied, cry during sad commercials. I used to think I had raised a good woman, and maybe at some point I did. Things began to change after she met Daniel Hayes. I still remember the first time she introduced him to me. It was a Sunday afternoon. I had made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, nothing fancy, but it was a proper meal. Lauren walked in first, smiling a little too brightly like she was trying to convince me of something before I even met him. Daniel followed behind her. He was tall, well-dressed, confident in a way that filled the room before he even spoke. He shook my hand firmly, looked me straight in the eye, and said all the right things. "Mrs. Moore, I've heard so much about you. Polite, respectful, charming." But there was something else too. A kind of calculation. At the time, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered just a second too long on certain things. The house, the furniture, the framed photos on the wall. Maybe it was the way he asked questions that sounded casual but weren't. "How long have you lived here? Did you and your husband buy the place together?" "It must be worth quite a bit now with the market going up." At first, I brushed it off. People talk about houses, about money. It didn't seem strange enough to matter. Lauren was happy, and that was what mattered most to me. They got married less than a year later. The wedding was beautiful, small but elegant. I paid for most of it, something I offered, not something they demanded. At least not then. I remember standing in the back of the venue watching Lauren walk down the aisle. She looked radiant, confident, grown. For a moment, I felt nothing but pride. After the wedding, they moved into a condo downtown. It wasn't cheap, but Daniel had a good job in financial consulting, and Lauren had recently been promoted at her company. They seemed stable, successful. At first, nothing seemed out of place. They came over for dinner occasionally. Lauren still called, though not as often. She was busy, she said. Married life, work, responsibilities. I understood. Life changes. People grow. I didn't expect everything to stay the same. But then slowly things began to shift. It started with small comments. "You shouldn't be handling all those bills yourself, Mom. It's a lot for one person. Have you thought about consolidating your accounts? It would make things easier. Older people are getting scammed all the time these days. You have to be careful." At first I thought it was concern, genuine concern, but there was something about the way Daniel said it, calm, measured, almost rehearsed, that made me uneasy. Lauren began echoing him. "Daniel knows a lot about this stuff, Mom. He helps clients with financial planning all the time. It wouldn't hurt to get his opinion." Opinion. That's what they called it. Then it became suggestions, then recommendations. And before I fully realized what was happening, those recommendations started to feel less like advice and more like direction. One afternoon, Lauren showed up unannounced. She had that same bright smile she used when she was trying too hard. "Mom, we just want to help you simplify things," she said, setting her purse down like she belonged there in a way that felt different. Daniel followed behind her carrying a folder. I noticed it immediately. Neat, organized, prepared. Too prepared. "We've been looking over some options," he said casually, placing the folder on my kitchen table. "Nothing binding, just ideas." Ideas. I remember standing there looking at that folder, feeling something shift inside me. Not fear, not yet. Just awareness. The kind that creeps in slowly like a draft under a closed door. I smiled politely. I poured coffee. I listened, because at that point, I still believed they were trying to help me. I still believed my daughter wouldn't hurt me. What I didn't realize then was that those ideas were the beginning of something far more calculated than I ever imagined. And by the time I understood what they were really doing, they were already 3 steps ahead. Or at least, that's what they thought. Looking back now, I realize that nothing they did in those early days was accidental. It was all gradual, measured, carefully paced so I wouldn't notice the shift until I was already standing on unfamiliar ground. That afternoon in my kitchen when Daniel opened that folder, everything still felt polite on the surface. Respectful, controlled. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply laid out documents like a man offering solutions, not taking control. "I've put together a few options that might make things easier for you, Elizabeth," he said, sliding the first sheet toward me. I remember the way he used my first name. Not Mrs. Moore. Not even Mom the way he sometimes did in front of Lauren. Just Elizabeth. It was subtle, but it changed the tone of the room. It placed him on equal ground. Or maybe just slightly above. Lauren stood beside him, nodding along like she trusted every word he said. "This is just to help you stay organized," she added gently. "You've always handled everything yourself, but you don't have to anymore." I forced a smile. "I've managed just fine so far," I replied, and I had, for decades. Through my husband's illness, through his passing, through every bill, every tax return, every unexpected expense, I had handled it all, quietly, carefully, without help. But they didn't argue. That was the thing. They didn't challenge me directly. They agreed. "Of course you have," Daniel said smoothly. "And that's exactly why we want to preserve what you've built. Not change it. Preserve." Such a comforting word. He pointed to a section on the paper. "This would just allow someone you trust to step in if anything ever happened. Temporary. Protective." I glanced at Lauren. She gave me a reassuring smile. "You'd still be in control, Mom. This is just a backup plan." A backup plan. At the time, it didn't sound unreasonable. Life is unpredictable. I knew that better than most. So I listened. I didn't sign anything that day, but I didn't refuse either. And that I now understand was exactly what they wanted. Not a yes, just not a no. Because once the door is open even a crack, it doesn't take much to push it wider. Over the next few weeks, their visits became more frequent. At first, it was once a week, then twice. Sometimes they'd stop by with groceries I hadn't asked for. Other times, Daniel would bring printouts articles about financial scams targeting seniors, statistics about identity theft stories designed to plant just enough fear to make their help seem necessary. "You can't be too careful these days," he'd say. Lauren would sit beside me on the couch, placing a hand over mine. "We just want you safe, Mom." Safe. It's a powerful word. It makes you lower your guard without realizing it. They never raised their voices, never pressured me outright, but they repeated the same ideas over and over in slightly different ways. Simplify. Protect. Prepare. And slowly, almost without noticing, I began to question myself. Was I being stubborn? Was I holding on to control out of habit, not necessity? Was it really so wrong to let someone else help? That's how it happens. Not with force, with doubt. The first real change came with my mail. One morning I noticed a bank statement was missing. I always kept them in a small wooden tray near the kitchen counter, organized, in order. But that envelope wasn't there. At first I assumed I had misplaced it. I searched the house, checked drawers, even looked in places I knew it wouldn't be. Nothing. Later that afternoon, Lauren called. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to let you know I stopped by earlier to grab your mail. I figured I'd sort through it for you so you don't have to worry about junk or scams." I stood there in the kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, my eyes drifting to the empty tray. "You came by." Without telling me, I asked. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough. "I didn't want to bother you," she said lightly. "You might have been resting." Resting? I wasn't resting. I hadn't rested in the middle of the day in years, but I let it go. Because again, it sounded like concern. That was the pattern. Everything they did could be explained away as care, and that made it harder to question. A few days later, Daniel brought it up again. "We've been thinking," he said, leaning back in his chair like he was discussing something casual. "It might make sense to centralize your accounts, just for simplicity." I frowned slightly. "My accounts are already simple," he smiled. "They're spread out across different institutions. That creates risk. If something happens, it's harder to manage quickly." Lauren nodded. "We could help you consolidate everything into one place, make it easier for you, and for us to assist if needed." There it was again. Assist. Always framed as temporary, always framed as support, never as control. I hesitated. Not because I didn't understand what they were saying, but because something inside me, something quiet but persistent, was starting to feel off. Not wrong enough to accuse, but not right enough to ignore. "I'll think about it," I said. Daniel didn't push. Of course, he replied, "Take your time." But his eyes told a different story. They were watching, calculating, waiting. The next sign came when I tried to log into one of my online accounts. I had always used the same password, a simple variation of something meaningful to me and Thomas. Easy to remember, never written down. But that day, it didn't work. I tried again, and again. Locked out. I stared at the screen, my heart beginning to beat just a little faster. Had I forgotten? Was this what they were talking about? Was I slipping? No. No. I wasn't. I knew my own mind. Still doubt crept in, just enough to make me hesitate before calling the bank. When I finally did, the representative told me the account had recently been updated. Updated how I asked my voice tighter than I intended. "There was a password reset and security question change last week," she said. Last week! I hadn't done that. I stood there in silence, the phone pressed to my ear as a slow, cold realization began to settle over me. This wasn't concern. This wasn't help. This was something else. Something deliberate. Something planned. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think the thought I had been avoiding. What if this wasn't Daniel's idea alone? What if my daughter, my own daughter, was part of it? That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the house quiet around me, staring at the framed photo on the mantel. Lauren at 10 years old, missing 2 front teeth, grinning up at the camera like the world was a good place. I remembered holding her hand on her first day of school, teaching her how to ride a bike, wiping her tears when she thought she wasn't good enough. And I asked myself a question that no mother ever wants to ask. When did I lose her? Or worse? Had I ever really known who she would become? Because now as I sat there in the dim light, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever they were doing, it had already begun. And if I didn't figure it out quickly, I wasn't just going to lose control of my finances, I was going to lose everything. The morning after I realized someone had changed my account access, I moved more slowly than usual, not because I was confused, but because I was thinking. Carefully. Deliberately. Fear has a way of making people rush, react, panic. But something inside me, something that had been sharpened by years of managing crises, quietly told me that rushing now would be the worst mistake I could make. If Lauren and Daniel were doing what I thought they were doing, then they were watching me, waiting for a reaction, so I gave them none. Instead, I made coffee, sat by the window, read the newspaper from front to back just like always. If anyone had been watching through the glass, they would have seen the same Elizabeth Moore they had seen for years. Routine, predictable, harmless. But inside, everything had shifted. That afternoon, I drove to the bank in person. I didn't call ahead. I didn't mention anything to Lauren. I simply walked in, greeted the teller by name. Sarah had been working there for years, and asked if I could speak privately with a manager. Within minutes, I was sitting in a small office with a man named Gregory Hale, a branch manager who looked young enough to be my grandson, but spoke with the calm authority of someone trained to handle delicate situations. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Moore?" he asked. I took a breath. I believe someone accessed my account without my permission. His expression didn't change dramatically, but I saw the shift. The alertness, the professionalism tightening just slightly around his eyes. "Can you tell me what makes you think that?" So I did. I told him about the password change, the missing mail, the sudden help from my daughter and son-in-law. I was careful not to accuse outright not yet. I simply laid out the facts. Gregory listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "We can review recent activity and access logs," he said. "If there's been unauthorized access, we'll see it." He turned his screen toward me. Line by line, we went through the account history. And there it was, a password reset request submitted from a device not registered to me. Security questions changed, email notifications redirected, all within a time frame that matched perfectly with Lauren's helpful visit. My chest tightened not with surprise, but with confirmation. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't forgotten. I hadn't lost control of my mind. Someone had taken control of my access. "Do you recognize the device or a P address?" Gregory asked gently. I shook my head. "No, but I have a very strong suspicion who might." He hesitated for a moment. "Would you like to file a formal report?" That question hung in the air between us. Formal report. That meant documentation, investigation, potential legal consequences. For my daughter. I looked down at my hands folded tightly in my lap. For 68 years, those hands had built a life, held a family together, provided, protected, nurtured. And now they trembled not from age, but from the weight of a decision no mother should have to make. "I need to think about that," I said quietly. Gregory nodded. "Of course. In the meantime, I strongly recommend we secure your account immediately. New credentials, multi-factor authentication, and we can restrict any third-party access." "Yes," I said quickly. "Do that." We spent the next hour resetting everything. New passwords, new security questions, ones no one else could guess. We removed all external authorizations. And when it was done, Gregory handed me a printed summary. "If anything else unusual happens, contact me directly," he said. "And Mrs. Moore, you're doing the right thing by taking this seriously." I gave him a small, tired smile. I just wish I didn't have to. When I left the bank, the air felt different. Heavier. Clearer. Like stepping outside after realizing a storm had been building while you were still inside thinking the sky was calm. That evening, Lauren called. Perfect timing. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in," she said, her voice bright and effortless. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word felt strange on my tongue. "How are you feeling today?" she asked. "Everything okay?" I could hear it now, the subtle probing beneath the concern. Testing. Measuring. "I'm fine," I said evenly. "Just a quiet day." "Good," she replied. "Did you get your mail?" I stopped by again this morning and picked some things up. There it was again. Without asking. Without permission. "You really don't have to do that, Lauren," I said gently. "Oh, I know," she laughed lightly. "I just want to help. You shouldn't have to worry about these things anymore. Anymore." I tightened my grip on the phone. "I've managed for a long time," I said. There was a pause. Then her tone shifted just slightly. "I know, Mom. But things change. Things change." The way she said it. It didn't sound like an observation. It sounded like a warning. We spoke for a few more minutes, small talk, nothing meaningful, and then she hung up. I stood there in the kitchen staring at the phone long after the call ended. It was becoming clearer now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't overprotection. This was a process. Step by step. Access. Control. Authority. and I was somewhere in the middle of it. That night I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out every important document I owned: deeds, bank statements, insurance policies, my will, everything. I spread them across the dining table, organizing them into neat stacks the way I always had when preparing reports at the clinic. Order calmed me. It reminded me who I was. I checked dates, signatures, account numbers, and then I found it. A document I didn't remember placing there, tucked neatly between two folders, printed on clean official paper. At the top in bold letters, "Durable power of attorney." My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I picked it up. My name was listed as the principal, Lauren Hayes as the designated agent. My eyes moved down the page, scanning the legal language. Authority over financial decisions, access to accounts, property management rights, all granted under my signature. My signature. I stared at it. It looked exactly like mine. The loops, the spacing, even the slight tilt I had developed over the years. Perfect. Too perfect. My heart began to pound, not with confusion this time, but with something far more dangerous. Clarity. I turned the page. There it was. A date. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I had been home, alone. I hadn't signed anything that day. I knew that with absolute certainty, and yet, here it was. Legal, convincing, damning. If presented in court, it would look legitimate. It would make me look forgetful, unreliable. Exactly the way they needed me to appear. I sank slowly into a chair, the paper trembling in my hands. This wasn't just access anymore. This wasn't just help. This was control, planned, executed, documented. And suddenly, everything made sense. The visits, the mail, the account changes, the subtle comments about my memory. They weren't reacting to a problem. They were creating one, building a case, piece by piece, so that when the time came, I wouldn't just lose control of my finances. I would lose my voice entirely. I sat there for a long time staring at that signature, at the imitation of my identity, at the quiet, calculated betrayal hidden in plain sight. And for the first time, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel doubtful. I felt something else. Something steady. Something sharp. Resolve. If they wanted to play this game, they had just made a mistake, because now I knew exactly what I was up against, and I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me. Not my home, not my independence, and certainly not the truth. I didn't confront them. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even the day after that. Every instinct in me, every ounce of hurt, anger, disbelief wanted to pick up the phone, demand an explanation, force the truth into the open. But something deeper, something quieter, and far more disciplined held me back, because confrontation would only do one thing: warn them. And if Lauren and Daniel had gone this far, if they had forged documents, accessed my accounts, built a case against me, then the last thing I could afford to do was let them know I had discovered the truth. So instead, I waited. I watched. I listened. And when they came over for dinner that Friday evening, I acted exactly the way they expected me to: calm, grateful, unaware. Lauren walked in first, carrying a bottle of wine like nothing in the world had changed. She leaned in to hug me, her cheek brushing mine, her perfume soft and familiar. "Hi, Mom," she said warmly. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, I almost believed it. I almost believed she was still the same girl who used to run into my arms after school, laughing, trusting, loving. But then Daniel stepped in behind her, and reality returned. "Elizabeth," he said, that same controlled smile on his face. "Smells wonderful in here." I nodded politely. "Just something simple," I replied. Dinner was quiet at first. Too quiet. The kind of silence that hums beneath the surface, waiting for something to break it. We sat around the table, my table, the one Thomas had built with his own hands decades ago. The same table that had seen birthdays, arguments, reconciliations, laughter. And now, it felt like a stage, every word measured, every glance calculated. Lauren took a sip of her wine, then set the glass down with deliberate ease. "Mom," she began, her tone light but purposeful. "Daniel and I have been thinking more about your situation." There it was. I kept my expression neutral. "My situation?" I asked gently. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "We're just concerned about your long-term comfort," he said. "This house. It's a lot for one person to manage." I took a slow bite of my food, giving myself a moment before responding. "I've managed it just fine so far." "Yes," Lauren said quickly, "but that doesn't mean you should have to keep doing everything alone." There was that word again. Alone. They were reframing my independence as isolation. Daniel nodded, picking up the thread smoothly. "We've looked into some options," he said. "There are excellent condo communities nearby, safe, low maintenance, designed specifically for people in your stage of life. My stage of life." I set my fork down carefully. "And what would happen to this house?" I asked. Lauren and Daniel exchanged a glance. Just a second. But it was enough. "We could help you sell it," Lauren said. "Make sure you get a good price. The market is strong right now." Of course it was. I looked around the room, the walls, the furniture, the small details that held decades of memory. "This house isn't just an asset," I said quietly. "It's my home." Lauren's expression tightened just slightly. "I know that, Mom," she said. "But sometimes holding on to things can make life harder than it needs to be. Harder." Again, that subtle shift. Everything framed as concern, everything leading to the same outcome. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his voice calm, almost reassuring. "We're not asking you to decide tonight," he said. "We just want you to start thinking about what's best for you moving forward." I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That seemed to satisfy them. For the moment. Dinner continued, but the tone had changed. The conversation drifted to safer topics, work, the weather, small, meaningless details that filled the space without touching anything real. But beneath it all, I could feel the tension, the expectation, the pressure building. After dessert, Lauren stood and began clearing plates without asking. "I've got it," she said quickly when I moved to help. "You should sit. Relax." I hesitated, then sat back down. Not because I needed to rest, but because I was learning, watching. From the kitchen, I could hear their voices, low, indistinct at first, then clearer. "She's still resistant," Lauren whispered. We expected that Daniel replied. "It takes time." Time. I remained perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. "We just need to keep guiding her," he continued. "Once the legal framework is in place, it won't matter." Legal framework. My pulse quickened. Lauren sighed softly. "I just don't want this to get messy." "It won't," Daniel assured her. "Not if we stay consistent." Consistent. Step by step. Piece by piece. Exactly as I had suspected, I closed my eyes for a brief moment, steadying myself. Then I stood, making just enough noise for them to know I was approaching. Their voices stopped instantly. By the time I entered the kitchen, both of them were smiling. "Everything okay?" I asked lightly. "Of course," Lauren said. "We were just talking about work." Work. Of course they were. I nodded, saying nothing. Later, after they left, I stood alone in the doorway watching their car disappear down the street. The night air was cool against my skin, but I barely felt it, because inside, something had shifted again. Not fear, not confusion, something stronger. Clarity. They weren't just suggesting I sell the house, they were planning for it, expecting it, counting on a future where this place, my home, would no longer belong to me. And that meant one thing. They believed they would have the authority to make that decision. Soon. I closed the door slowly, locking it behind me. For the first time in my life, I checked every window, every latch, every possible point of entry. Not because I was afraid of strangers, but because I finally understood the truth. The danger wasn't outside. It was already inside my life, inside my trust, inside my family. I walked back to the dining table where the documents still lay in neat, careful stacks. At the top of the pile, the forged power of attorney stared back at me, a symbol of everything they were trying to take, everything they believed I wouldn't fight. I picked it up, holding it in both hands, and this time I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt focused, because now I knew exactly what they were doing. And more importantly, I knew I had to be smarter than them. No more waiting. No more hoping they would stop. If they were building a case against me, then I would build one of my own. Stronger. Smarter. Impossible to ignore. Because one thing was certain now. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. This was a battle, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I asked for help. Not from Lauren, not from anyone connected to her or Daniel. I needed someone outside their reach, someone who could see clearly what I was only beginning to understand. That's how I found Margaret Collins. Margaret lived 2 houses down from me in a modest brick home with white shutters and a front porch that always seemed to catch the morning light just right. We had been neighbors for nearly 15 years. We waved when we saw each other, exchanged cookies during the holidays, chatted briefly over the fence about weather and gardening, but we had never been close. Not until that morning. I walked up to her front door just after 9, the documents in my bag feeling heavier with every step. For a moment I hesitated, hand raised, unsure if I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. Then I knocked. Margaret opened the door almost immediately. She was in her early 70s, sharp-eyed, neatly dressed even at that hour, her gray hair pulled back in a way that suggested discipline rather than vanity. She looked at me once really looked, and something in her expression shifted. "Elizabeth," she said slowly, "you look like you've come with a problem." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I think I have." She stepped aside without another question. "Come in." Her living room was simple but orderly. Everything in its place, nothing unnecessary. It reminded me of how I used to keep my office at the clinic. Controlled. Intentional. Safe. We sat at her dining table, and for the first time since this all began, I told someone everything. The missing mail, the account access, the conversations, the forged document. Margaret didn't interrupt. She didn't react dramatically. She simply listened, her fingers steepled in front of her, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, the silence stretched for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Financial exploitation," she said. The words landed with a weight that made everything feel suddenly real in a way it hadn't before. I was afraid of that, I admitted. Margaret leaned back slightly. "I spent 25 years working as a court clerk," she said. I've seen cases like this more times than I care to count. Something cold settled in my chest. Cases like this? Between strangers, I asked. She shook her head. Between family? Of course. That made it worse somehow, not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed what I had been trying not to fully accept. Margaret reached for the document I had brought and adjusted her glasses as she examined it. "This power of attorney," she murmured. "At first glance, it looks legitimate." "It isn't," I said firmly. "I never signed it." "I believe you," she replied calmly. "But belief isn't what matters in court. Proof is proof." The word echoed in my mind. How do I prove something I didn't do? I asked. Margaret looked up at me, her expression steady, by showing how it was done. She tapped the paper lightly. "There's always a trail, Elizabeth. People who do this, they rely on the assumption that no one will look closely enough, that the victim will be too confused, too overwhelmed, or too trusting to question it." I swallowed hard. "I trusted her," I said quietly. Margaret's gaze softened for just a moment. "That's what makes these cases work," she said, "and that's what makes them so hard to fight." She set the document down and folded her hands. "You need to stop thinking like a mother for a moment," she continued, "and start thinking like someone defending her life. Her life. Not just her money. Not just her house. Her life." The distinction hit me harder than I expected. "What do?" I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. "First, you don't confront them." "Not yet." I nodded. "I haven't." "Good. Second, you start documenting everything. Every visit, every conversation, dates, times, details, even things that seem small." "I can do that." "Third," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you protect your access. Bank accounts, documents, anything they could use." "I've already started," I said. "I went to the bank yesterday." A flicker of approval crossed her face. "Then you're ahead of where most people are by the time they come to me." That surprised me. "I don't feel ahead," I admitted. "That's because you're still seeing this as something that might go away," she said gently. "It won't." Her certainty was unsettling but also grounding. "Then what's next?" I asked. Margaret paused, considering her words carefully. "Next? You let them think they're winning." I frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because people get careless when they believe they're in control," she said. "They talk more. They move faster. They make mistakes." Mistakes. I thought of the conversation I had overheard the night before, the legal framework, the quiet confidence in Daniel's voice. "They already think I don't understand what's happening," I said slowly. "Exactly," Margaret replied. "Use that." The idea settled into place in my mind, uncomfortable but logical. "You're asking me to pretend I said. I'm asking you to survive," she corrected. There was no judgment in her tone, no softness either, just truth. I looked down at my hands again, remembering how they had trembled in the bank office, how they had shaken when I first saw that forged signature. Now they were steady. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear was no longer the only thing I felt. There was something else now. Purpose. "How far are they likely to go?" I asked quietly. Margaret held my gaze. "As far as they believe they can," she said. A chill ran through me. "And if I do nothing?" She didn't hesitate. "They'll take control. Legally if they can. Quietly if they think they won't be challenged." I exhaled slowly, then nodded. "I won't let that happen." Margaret studied me for a moment as if weighing something. Then she stood. "Come with me," she said. She led me into a small study at the back of the house. Shelves lined the walls, filled with neatly organized binders and boxes. She pulled one down and opened it on the desk. Inside were documents, case notes, legal references, examples. "This is from a case 5 years ago," she said. A son tried to take control of his mother's finances using a nearly identical method. I leaned in, scanning the pages. It was all there. The gradual involvement, the forged authorization, the claim of mental decline. "It didn't work," Margaret added. "Why not?" I asked. "Because she caught it early," she said, "and she didn't panic." I looked at her. "Like me?" Margaret allowed herself a small, almost approving smile. "Like you." For the first time since this began, I felt something shift inside me, not just awareness, not just fear, but something steadier, confidence. Not in the situation, but in my ability to face it. As I left her house that afternoon, the world looked the same. The same street, the same houses, the same quiet rhythm of everyday life. But I was different, because now I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing, and somewhere just beneath the surface, I could already feel it. The moment when everything would come to light. The moment when the truth would no longer be something I carried alone. And when that moment came, they wouldn't be the ones in control anymore. Margaret's words stayed with me long after I left her house. Let them think they're winning. It sounded simple. Almost too simple for something that could determine the rest of my life. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood what she meant. If I showed resistance, they would tighten their grip. If I showed fear, they would move faster. But if I showed weakness, they would reveal everything. So that afternoon, I made a decision that went against every instinct I had as a mother. I would let my daughter believe I was slipping. The first time I tried it, my hands trembled. Lauren had stopped by again, unannounced as usual. She let herself in with the spare key I had once given her out of trust, not caution. "Mom," she called out as she walked into the living room. I turned toward her, slowly letting a moment pass before responding. "Oh, Lauren, I didn't hear you come in." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. She studied my face carefully, searching for something. A sign. A crack. "How are you feeling today?" She asked, her tone soft but watchful. I hesitated just enough. I'm fine," I said, then added, "I think I forgot to take my medication this morning. I didn't even take medication." But I watched her reaction closely. There it was. A flicker. Not concern. Something else. Something colder. "I can help you with that," she said quickly. "We should probably make a schedule. You don't want to forget important things?" I nodded slowly, lowering my eyes as if embarrassed. "No, I suppose not." The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. But it worked. From that moment on, something changed in her behavior. She relaxed. Not completely, but enough. Enough to start slipping. Over the next few days, I leaned into the role. I repeated questions I had already asked. I misplaced harmless items on purpose. I paused longer than necessary before answering simple things, and each time, Lauren and Daniel grew more confident, more certain, more careless. Daniel began speaking more openly in front of me, as if I weren't fully present. "We need to finalize the timeline," he said one evening while flipping through his phone at my kitchen table. "The sooner we move forward, the better." Lauren nodded. "I know. I just don't want it to feel rushed." "It won't," he replied calmly. "We already have most of what we need." Most of what we need. I stood at the sink washing dishes slowly, my back turned to them but my ears sharp, and the house Lauren asked quietly. Daniel didn't hesitate. We'll list it once everything is in place. It's worth too much to leave sitting. My grip tightened around the plate in my hands. It's worth too much. Not it means too much. Not it matters to her, just value, numbers, profit. I forced myself to keep moving, to keep the rhythm of normalcy. Water running, dishes clinking, nothing out of place. And her accounts Lauren pressed. Daniel's voice lowered slightly, but not enough. Once the authority is formalized, we consolidate everything. Clean, simple. No loose ends. No loose ends. A chill ran through me. That wasn't just about money. That was about control. Complete control. That night after they left, I sat in the living room with my notebook open. Every detail went down. Dates, times, exact phrases. I wrote everything as clearly as I could, just like Margaret had instructed, because memory could be questioned. But written records, those carried weight. The next step was riskier. Margaret had mentioned something else before I left that day. Evidence doesn't just come from what you remember, she had said. It comes from what you can show. So I started using the small voice recorder I had bought years ago and never used. At first it felt wrong, sneaky, unnatural. But then I reminded myself. They had already crossed that line. I was just catching up. The first recording was clumsy. I forgot to turn it on until halfway through a conversation. My hands shook so much I nearly dropped it. But I kept trying, and slowly, I got better. More natural, more careful. One afternoon, Daniel arrived alone. That was new. Lauren was usually with him, present, involved, reinforcing everything he said. But this time, it was just him. "Thought I'd check in," he said casually, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I smiled faintly. "That's kind of you." He walked through the house slowly, his eyes moving over everything with quiet assessment. The walls, the furniture, the framed photos, taking inventory. "You've built a beautiful life here, Elizabeth," he said. Elizabeth. Not Mom. Not Mrs. Moore. Just Elizabeth. Detached. Professional. "Thank you," I replied softly. He turned toward me, his expression almost sympathetic. "You know transitions like this are never easy," he continued. "But they're necessary." I tilted my head slightly. "Transitions?" He smiled. "Change. Letting go of things that are no longer practical." Practical. I lowered myself into a chair, letting my shoulders slump just a little. "I suppose I don't always understand what's best anymore," I said quietly. It was the hardest sentence I had ever spoken. Not because it was true, but because it sounded like surrender. Daniel watched me closely. "And then," he nodded. "That's okay," he said. "That's why you have us. Us." The word echoed in my mind long after he left. That evening I played back the recording. His voice was clear, measured, confident, and beneath it, something unmistakable. Assumption, control, certainty that I would not fight back. I sat there in the dim light, listening to it again and again, letting every word settle into place. This was no longer suspicion, no longer instinct. This was evidence. Real. Tangible. And it was only the beginning, because the more they believed I was fading, the more they revealed. And with every careless word, every quiet assumption, every calculated step they thought I couldn't see, they were building my case for me. They just didn't know it yet. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen slicing an apple I had no intention of eating when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the timing made my chest tighten before I even answered. "Hello, this is Elizabeth Moore." "Good morning, Mrs. Moore. This is Karen from First State Bank. I'm calling to verify a transaction request on your account." My grip on the knife stilled. "A transaction?" I repeated carefully. "Yes, ma'am. There was a request submitted this morning to transfer a substantial amount from your savings account. Because of the amount and recent security changes, it triggered a verification flag." I felt the room go very still. "How substantial?" I asked. There was a brief pause. $75,000. The number hit me like a physical force. Not because of the amount alone, but because I knew exactly what account she was referring to. The education fund, the one I had set up years ago for my granddaughter Sophie. I set the knife down slowly, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I did not authorize that transfer." "Thank you for confirming," Karen said immediately. "We've placed a temporary hold on the transaction. However, the request was submitted through an authorized access point." "Authorized?" "Of course it was. Can you tell me how the request was made?" I asked. "It appears to have been initiated through an online portal linked to your account permissions," she explained. "Would you like to come in and review this in person?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'll be there within the hour." When I hung up, I didn't move right away. I just stood there staring at the apple on the cutting board, my reflection faintly visible in the blade of the knife. $75,000. For Sophie. Not Lauren. Not Daniel. Sophie. A fund built over years, birthday deposits, careful savings, small sacrifices made quietly so that one day she would have a chance at something better. And they had tried to take it. Not ask, not borrow, take. The anger that rose in me then was different from anything I had felt before. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was cold, focused, final. I arrived at the bank 15 minutes earlier than I had told Karen, the folder of documents in my bag heavier than ever. Gregory Hale was waiting for me again, his expression already serious. "Mrs. Moore," he said, standing as I entered his office. "Thank you for coming in so quickly. I assume you've seen the request," I replied. He nodded. "We have, and I'm glad we flagged it before it was processed." He turned his screen toward me. There was an attempt to transfer funds into a newly added external account. The authorization credentials used were linked to an approved access profile. Approved. That word again. "Lauren Hayes," I said quietly. Gregory didn't confirm directly, but he didn't need to. "Based on the access permissions we reviewed last time, your daughter had been granted limited visibility in the past," he said carefully. "It's possible those permissions were expanded through the document you mentioned." "The power of attorney?" "Of course." "They're using it," I said. "Yes," he replied. "Or attempting to." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. "This account," I said, opening the folder and sliding a document across the desk, "is designated for my granddaughter. It's not discretionary." Gregory reviewed the document quickly. "I see that," he said, "which makes this transaction even more concerning." Concerning. A polite word for something far more serious. "What happens now?" I asked. "We've blocked the transfer and flagged the account for enhanced monitoring," he said. "But if someone continues to attempt access using legal documentation, even fraudulent, it may escalate beyond our internal controls." "Meaning?" "They'll keep trying," I said. Gregory met my gaze. "Yes." I exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Good." He blinked, slightly surprised. "Good," he repeated. "Yes, I said, my voice steady, because now we have proof. The shift in the room was subtle but real. I wasn't just a concerned account holder anymore. I was someone building a case. Gregory leaned back slightly, studying me with a new level of attention. If you're pursuing legal action, he said, we can provide documentation of all attempted transactions, access logs, and communication records. I will need all of that, I replied. He nodded. I'll have it prepared. When I left the bank, the air felt sharper than before, clearer, like something had finally crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. This was intent, documented, recorded, provable. And yet, as I drove home, another feeling crept in beneath the anger. Grief. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about what that money represented. Sophie's future. My promise to her. And the realization that her own parents were willing to jeopardize that for their own gain. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long moment before going inside. The house looked the same. Quiet. Familiar. Safe. But I knew better now. Inside, I placed the bank documents on the table beside my notebook. Another entry, another piece of the puzzle. And then, my phone buzzed. Lauren. Of course. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice bright and effortless as if nothing had happened. Hi, Lauren. I was just thinking about you, she continued. How are you feeling today? There it was again, that careful probing. I'm a little tired, I said slowly. I didn't sleep well. Concern filled her tone instantly. Oh no, you really need to take care of yourself, Mom. Stress isn't good for you. Stress. If she only knew. I'll be fine, I said. There was a pause. Then Mom. I was actually going to stop by later. Daniel and I want to go over a few things with you. Of course they did. Timing, as always, was perfect. That's fine, I replied quietly. After we hung up, I didn't move. I just sat there staring at the phone, my mind already shifting into place. Because now, everything had changed. They had made a move. A big one. And it had failed. Which meant one thing. They would push harder. Faster. More aggressively. And that was exactly what I needed. Because the more they pushed, the more they exposed. I reached for my notebook, flipping to a fresh page. Date. Time. Call received. Bank verification. Attempted transfer $75,000. Purpose unauthorized. And beneath it, I wrote one more line. They are no longer testing limits. They are crossing them. I closed the notebook gently, because now there was no room left for doubt, no space for hesitation, no illusion of misunderstanding. This was betrayal, clear, deliberate, and escalating. And as I sat there in the quiet of my own home, one truth settled into place with absolute certainty. If I didn't stop them soon, they wouldn't just take my money. They would take everything I had left. I didn't sleep the night after the bank call. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. Every detail, every conversation, every small shift in behavior replayed itself in sharp, relentless clarity. The forged document, the account access, the quiet assumptions in Daniel's voice, the careful, almost rehearsed concern in Lauren's. It all fit together now, too well. Margaret had been right. There was a pattern to this, a method. And if there was a method, there was a way to dismantle it. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I needed a lawyer, Not just any lawyer, but someone who understood cases like this. Someone who wouldn't dismiss it as a family misunderstanding or advise me to handle it quietly. This wasn't something to handle quietly. This was something to stop. Margaret had given me a name before I left her house the day before. Michael Grant, she had said. He specializes in elder law. Good reputation. Doesn't scare easily. At 9:30 sharp, I called his office. The receptionist's voice was calm, efficient. Law office of Michael Grant. How may I assist you? My name is Elizabeth Moore, I said. I believe I may be the victim of financial exploitation. I was told Mr. Grant might be able to help. There was a brief pause. Then her tone shifted just slightly more attentive. Let me see if he's available. A moment later, another voice came on the line. Mrs. Moore, this is Michael Grant. His voice was steady, direct. Not overly sympathetic, but not dismissive either. How can I help you? I didn't hesitate. I told him everything. Not in fragments, not in uncertainty, but clearly, chronologically, precisely. By the time I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, You did the right thing by calling, he said. Something in my chest loosened at those words. I wasn't sure I admitted. You should be, he replied. What you're describing raises multiple red flags: unauthorized access, possible document fraud, attempted asset transfer. This isn't just concerning. It's actionable. Actionable. The word grounded me. I'd like you to come in as soon as possible, he continued. Bring every document you have. Bank records, the power of attorney, any notes you've kept. I have all of that, I said. Good. And Mrs. Moore? Yes. Until we meet, do not sign anything, do not agree to anything, and do not let them know you're seeking legal counsel. I nodded instinctively, even though he couldn't see me. I understand. When I hung up, I felt something shift again, not fear leaving, but something stronger taking its place. Structure, direction, a path forward. The office was downtown in a building I had passed 100 times without ever noticing. Clean lines, glass doors, quiet professionalism. Inside, everything was orderly, controlled. Michael Grant was in his early 50s, composed, sharply dressed, with the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice to command attention. He greeted me with a firm handshake. Mrs. Moore. Thank you for seeing me, I said. Of course. Let's sit. We spent nearly 2 hours going through everything. He didn't rush, didn't interrupt unnecessarily, but when he asked questions, they were precise, focused. He examined the power of attorney carefully, his expression tightening just slightly. This signature, he said, tracing the line with his finger. It's good. Very good. But not mine, I said. He looked up at me. I believe you, he said, but we'll need to prove it. He moved on to the bank documents, reviewing the attempted transfer. This is significant, he murmured. An unauthorized attempt on a restricted fund. That strengthens your position considerably. Strengthens. Another word that made this feel less like chaos and more like a case. He leaned back in his chair. Have they filed anything yet? He asked. I believe they've started the process, I said. They mentioned legal steps. A framework. He nodded slowly. That likely means a petition for guardianship or conservatorship, he said. If granted, it would give them legal authority over your financial decisions and potentially more. My stomach tightened. How close are they? That depends, he replied. But if they have a document like this, he tapped the power of attorney, and if they can present evidence suggesting cognitive decline. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They could win, I said quietly. Yes, he said, if unchallenged. Unchallenged. I straightened slightly. It will be challenged, I said. For the first time since I had entered the room, something like approval flickered across his face. Good, he said, because you have more leverage than you realize. He opened a notepad and began outlining steps. First, we file to contest any existing petitions. Second, we initiate a forensic review of the document, handwriting, analysis, notarization, verification, all of it. Third, we gather supporting evidence, bank records, your documentation, witness testimony. Witness, I asked. Your neighbor, he said. Margaret Collins. Her background in court procedure makes her particularly credible. I nodded. She's been helping me. Good, he said. We'll need her. He paused, then looked directly at me. And Mrs. Moore? I'm going to be very clear about something. I met his gaze. This is not just a legal matter, he continued. This is a family matter that has crossed into legal territory. That makes it more complicated, but also more dangerous. I understand, I said. Do you? He pressed gently. Because once this moves forward, there's no going back to how things were. A quiet weight settled in the room. No going back to the calls, the laughter, the illusion of trust. I thought of Lauren as a child, then of her voice on the phone just hours ago, bright, controlled, careful. I don't think there's anything left to go back to, I said softly. Michael studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, he said. Then we move forward. As I gathered my things to leave, he added one more thing. They're expecting you to react emotionally, he said. To panic. To make mistakes. I paused. I won't, I said. I know, he replied. And that's exactly why you have a chance to win this. Win? The word felt strange, because this didn't feel like a victory waiting to happen. It felt like survival. When I stepped back out onto the street, the city moved around me as it always had, cars passing, people walking, life continuing without pause. But I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle into place. Because now, this wasn't just preparation. This was action. They had made their move. And now, so had I. Lauren came the next afternoon. She didn't call ahead this time. She didn't need to. By now she had grown used to walking into my house as if it were already partially hers, her key sliding into the lock, her steps confident, familiar, unhesitating. I was sitting in the living room when she entered, a book open in my lap that I hadn't actually been reading. Mom, she called out. I'm here, I answered, letting my voice carry just a hint of distraction. She stepped into the room, slowly studying me. There was something different about her today. Not the brightness she usually wore like a mask. Something heavier, uncertain. She sat across from me, placing her purse carefully on the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I've been thinking, she said quietly. I looked up, meeting her eyes. About what? About everything, she replied. Everything. Such a broad word. Such a careful one. I closed the book gently. What about it? She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not calculation, not control. Something closer to doubt. I think maybe things have gotten a little complicated, she said. Complicated. I nodded slowly, as if considering the word. Yes, I said. I suppose they have, she exhaled softly, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. I don't want you to feel like we're taking over your life, she continued. That's not what this is. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, giving her space to fill it. I know Daniel can be intense, she added quickly. He's just trying to make sure everything is secure. Secure. There it was again. Always that word. I understand, I said quietly. She leaned forward slightly. Do you? She asked. The question caught me off guard not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. There was something in her voice now, something searching, as if she needed me to say yes. I think I do, I replied carefully. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached into her purse. I need to show you something, she said. My chest tightened, but my expression remained calm. Okay. She pulled out a set of documents. Not the same ones I had already found. These were newer, more official, more complete. She placed them on the table between us. These are just formalities, she said softly. Nothing urgent, just paperwork to make sure everything is handled properly. I looked down at the papers. Even without reading every word, I knew what they were. Legal filings. Prepared. Structured. Ready. This would give me temporary authority to help manage things, she continued. Only if needed. Only if something happened. Temporary. Only if needed. Only if something happened. The same phrases, the same pattern, but now they were being placed directly in front of me. I let my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the papers as if unsure. I don't know, I said slowly. This feels like a lot. It's not, she insisted gently. It's just protection. Protection. I looked up at her, at my daughter, at the person I had raised, loved, trusted without question for most of my life. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw the conflict in her eyes. Real. Unfiltered. Mom, she said, her voice softer now. I just want to make sure you're safe. Safe? I swallowed, letting my gaze drift back to the papers. I've always been safe, I said quietly. Yes, but I don't feel unsafe now, I added, interrupting her gently. She stopped. The room went still. For a second I thought she might push, might insist, might let the mask drop completely. But instead, she leaned back and sighed. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, she said. Uncomfortable. Not threatened. Not controlled. Just uncomfortable. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? I asked softly. The question hung between us. Simple. Direct. Impossible to avoid. Lauren looked down at her hands, then back at me, and in that moment I saw it, the truth she had been holding just beneath the surface. It's about making things easier, she said. Easier? For who I didn't ask. I didn't need to, because her next words answered it for me. For all of us, not just me, not just her, all of us. The shift was small, but it was everything, because it revealed what this had always been about. Not protection, not care, convenience, control, access. I nodded slowly as if accepting her explanation. I understand, I said. Relief flickered across her face, but it didn't last, because something in my tone, something subtle, made her hesitate. Do you? She asked again. I met her gaze. I think I do, I repeated. The room fell quiet, and then she stood. I should go, she said quickly. I didn't mean to overwhelm you. Overwhelm? Another soft word, another careful choice. You didn't, I replied. She gathered the papers, hesitating for just a second before sliding them back into her purse. Think about it, she said. I will. She moved toward the door, then paused. Mom, yes, I'm not trying to hurt you. The words were quiet, almost sincere. I felt something twist inside me, because part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the version of Lauren I used to know. But I had seen too much now, heard too much, documented too much. I know, I said gently. It wasn't entirely a lie, because I did believe she wasn't trying to hurt me. Not intentionally, not in the way a stranger might. But intent didn't change the outcome. And the outcome was already unfolding. She nodded once, then left. The door closed softly behind her. And just like that, the house was quiet again. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where she had been. Then I reached for the small recorder on the side table and pressed stop. The entire conversation had been captured. Every word, every pause, every shift in tone. I set the device down carefully, my hands steady, because now there was no ambiguity left, no room for doubt. Lauren hadn't come to confess. She hadn't come to apologize. She had come to advance the plan, to move things forward, to secure the next step. And she had done it believing I wouldn't understand what was happening, that I wouldn't see the pattern, that I wouldn't fight back. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for just a moment, because now more than ever, I understood exactly where we stood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't confusion. This was strategy. And the next move would determine everything. The morning of the hearing arrived colder than I expected. Not just the weather, though. Ohio in late fall has a way of biting through coats and gloves, but something deeper. A quiet stillness that settles in your chest when you know a line is about to be drawn. I woke before dawn, not because I had to, but because sleep no longer came easily. The house was dark silent except for the faint hum of the heater. I made coffee the same way I always did, measured, steady, deliberate. Routine had become my anchor, something familiar in a situation that was anything but. As I stood by the kitchen window watching the sky slowly lighten, I allowed myself one moment of honesty. I was afraid, not of losing my money, not even of losing my house, but of what this day represented. Because by the time it was over, whatever remained of the relationship between me and my daughter would be different, permanent, and there would be no way back. I set the cup down untouched. Then I got ready. I chose my clothes carefully, not out of vanity, but intention. A navy blouse, pressed slacks, a light gray coat. Nothing extravagant, nothing fragile. I wasn't going into that courtroom as a victim. I was going in as someone who knew exactly what she was doing. At precisely 8:30, a car pulled into my driveway. Michael Grant stepped out first, followed by Margaret Collins. Seeing them together, steady, composed, prepared, did something I hadn't expected. It steadied me. "You ready?" Michael asked as I opened the door. I nodded. Yes. The drive to the courthouse was quiet, not uncomfortable, not tense, just focused. Michael reviewed a few final points, his voice calm and precise. They'll try to establish a pattern, he said. Moments of confusion, forgetfulness, anything that suggests cognitive decline. I know I replied. "Don't react emotionally," he added. "Answer clearly, directly. Let the evidence speak where it needs to. I will." Margaret sat beside me in the back seat, her presence solid grounding. "You've done everything right so far," she said quietly. "Just keep doing it." I gave a small nod. When we arrived, the courthouse loomed larger than I remembered. Stone steps, tall columns, the kind of building designed to make people feel small. But I didn't feel small. Not anymore. Inside, the air was cool, the floors polished, the sounds echoing softly through wide hallways. We checked in, waited briefly, then moved toward the courtroom. And that's when I saw them. Lauren stood near the entrance, her posture straight, her expression carefully composed. Daniel was beside her, speaking quietly to a man I assumed was their attorney. They looked confident, relaxed, certain. Lauren glanced up as we approached. Our eyes met. And then she smiled. Not warmly, not nervously, but with a small, almost imperceptible curl at the corner of her mouth. A smile that said, "This is already decided." Daniel followed her gaze. He looked at me once briefly, then shook his head slightly as if confirming something to himself. Dismissive, certain. They believed they had already won. I felt the familiar sting of that realization, but it didn't shake me, because this time I knew something they didn't. Michael didn't slow as we passed them. "Stay focused," he murmured. I said. We took our seats. The courtroom wasn't large, but it carried weight. Wood-paneled walls, a raised bench, rows of chairs that held the quiet tension of every case that had come before. When the judge entered the room, shifted instantly. Everyone stood. And just like that, it began. Their attorney went first. A man in his 40s, polished, confident, with the kind of voice that filled a room without needing to raise it. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today out of concern for Mrs. Elizabeth Moore's well-being." Concern. Always that word. He spoke smoothly, building his case piece by piece. Age, isolation, increased dependence. Subtle but effective. Then came the examples, moments where I had forgotten things, times when I had seemed confused, instances where Lauren had stepped in to help, each one presented as evidence, each one carefully framed. I felt Margaret shift slightly beside me. She knew. They were using my own performance against me, and for a moment, just a moment, I understood how convincing it must sound to someone who didn't know the full story. Because if I had been watching this from the outside, I might have believed them too. Their attorney continued, "Mrs. Hayes and her husband are not seeking control for personal gain," he said. "They are seeking to ensure that Mrs. Moore's affairs are managed responsibly with care and oversight." Care, oversight, protection. The same words, the same pattern. Then Lauren was called. She stood composed, measured her voice soft but steady. "I love my mother," she said. The words hung in the air. Simple, powerful. "I just want what's best for her." She spoke about concern, about changes she had noticed, about her fear that I might be vulnerable. Every sentence carefully balanced between emotion and logic. Every word chosen to sound sincere. And the worst part, she sounded convincing, because somewhere buried beneath everything else, there was truth in her voice. Not about what she was doing, but about what she believed she was doing. That made it harder, more complicated, more painful. When she finished, she returned to her seat. Daniel didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His role was different. Support, structure, reinforcement. Then it was our turn. Michael stood, calm, unhurried. "Your Honor," he began, "what we have heard today is a narrative of concern." He paused. "Now we would like to present the reality." The shift in the room was subtle but unmistakable, because this was the moment everything would begin to change. I sat there, hands folded, heart steady, eyes forward. Lauren glanced at me. For the first time since I had entered the room, her expression faltered, just slightly, because something in the air had shifted, something she couldn't quite name, but could feel. And I realized then this was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment when their certainty would begin to crack. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece, just like everything else in this story. And as I sat there listening, watching, waiting, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They had walked into this courtroom believing I was weak, that I was confused, that I wouldn't fight. And in just a few minutes, they were going to learn how wrong they were. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room had already shifted the moment he stood, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that even the smallest word now seemed to carry weight. "Your Honor," he began again, measured and calm. The petition before this court relies on a narrative that appears compassionate on the surface, but when examined closely, it is built on selective interpretation and omission. Omission. A quiet word. A powerful one. Lauren's attorney straightened slightly but said nothing. Michael turned a single page on his notepad. "The claim," he continued, "is that Mrs. Moore has demonstrated cognitive decline sufficient to require external control of her financial and personal affairs." He paused, letting the phrasing settle. "But we intend to show that what has been presented as evidence of decline was in fact a deliberate misrepresentation." A ripple moved through the room, not loud, but noticeable. Lauren's posture shifted beside me, just slightly, enough that I could feel it without looking. Michael continued, "Let's begin with the alleged pattern of forgetfulness." He turned toward me briefly. "Mrs. Moore, could you please stand?" I rose steady, composed. "Mrs. Moore?" He said, his tone respectful but precise. "Do you recall the dates and nature of the events your daughter referenced in her testimony?" "I do," I answered. "Clearly?" "Yes." He nodded. "Then, for the record, can you explain why those events appeared as they did?" There it was, the question that would either hold or break everything. I took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough. Those moments I said my voice even were not instances of confusion. They were intentional. A murmur spread quietly through the room. Michael didn't interrupt. He let it happen. Intentional in what way, he asked. "I chose to appear forgetful," I said. The words felt strange in the air, but they were true. "Why would you do that?" he pressed. I turned slightly, not toward him, but toward the bench. "Because I had reason to believe my daughter and her husband were attempting to gain unauthorized control over my finances," I said. "And I needed to understand how far they were willing to go." Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Lauren's attorney stood abruptly. "Objection. Your Honor, this is speculative and overruled," the judge said calmly. "Continue." Michael nodded once. "Mrs. Moore, when did you first begin to suspect unauthorized activity?" I answered without hesitation. "After discovering changes to my bank account access and identifying a power of attorney document bearing my signature that I did not sign." Michael stepped closer to the bench, presenting the document. Your Honor, this is the document in question. The judge reviewed it briefly. And you are stating this signature is not yours? Michael asked. That is correct, I said. Lauren shifted again. This time I heard it. A sharp inhale. Michael turned slightly. Your Honor, we will provide expert analysis on this document shortly, but first, we would like to address the context in which it was used. He returned to his table, picking up a folder. Over the past several weeks, Mrs. Moore has documented multiple instances of unauthorized access, attempted financial transfers, and conversations indicating intent to assume control of her assets. Lauren's attorney rose again. Objection! Sit down, the judge said firmly. You'll have your turn. The room stilled. Michael opened the folder. We will begin with a bank record. He handed a document to the clerk, who passed it forward. This record shows an attempted transfer of $75,000 from an account designated for Mrs. Moore's granddaughter. The judge's eyes moved across the page, and this transfer was authorized by whom the judge asked. Michael didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned slightly. Mrs. Moore, did you authorize this transaction? No, I said. Were you aware of it before the bank contacted you? No. Michael nodded. Your Honor, the transaction was initiated through an access point linked to the authority granted by the contested document. A pause. Long enough for the implication to settle. Lauren's attorney stood again, this time more controlled. Your Honor, my clients deny any intent of personal gain. This was a precautionary measure. Michael raised a hand slightly. Then perhaps he said calmly, they can't explain the next piece of evidence. He reached into his briefcase and placed a small device on the table. The recorder. Lauren's eyes locked onto it instantly. And in that moment, I saw it. The first real crack. Michael pressed a button. The room filled with Daniel's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. Once the legal framework is in place, it won't matter. The recording continued. Lauren's voice followed. I just don't want it to get messy. Daniel again. It won't. Not if we stay consistent. The words echoed in the courtroom, stripped of context only in the sense that there was no longer any need for interpretation. They spoke for themselves. The silence that followed was absolute. Lauren's attorney opened his mouth, then closed it. Because there was nothing to say. Michael didn't rush. He let the silence do the work. Then, there are additional recordings, he said, as well as corroborating testimony from Mrs. Collins and documentation from First State Bank. The judge leaned back slightly, eyes moving between the documents, the recorder, and the two people sitting across from me. Lauren's hands were clenched in her lap. Daniel's expression had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The confidence was gone, replaced by calculation, reassessment. Michael spoke again. Your Honor, what has been presented as a case of concern is in fact a coordinated effort to assume control over Mrs. Moore's financial assets through misrepresentation and unauthorized action. He paused. And we are only just beginning to present the evidence. The words hung in the air, because they weren't a conclusion. They were a warning. Lauren looked at me then, really looked at me, not as someone confused, not as someone weak, but as someone she no longer recognized. And in her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not certainty, not control, but fear. Small, flickering, but real. And in that moment I understood something with absolute clarity. The narrative had shifted. The ground beneath them was no longer stable. And for the first time since this began, they were the ones trying to catch up. The silence after the recording ended didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on everyone in the room. No one moved. No one spoke. For a moment, even the judge seemed to pause, not out of uncertainty, but out of recognition that something fundamental had shifted. Michael didn't rush to fill the silence. He didn't need to, because now they had to respond. Lauren's attorney stood slowly adjusting his jacket as if buying himself time. "Your Honor." He began, his tone more measured now, while the recording is concerning it lacks full context. My clients. Then perhaps the judge interrupted calmly. Your clients would like to provide that context. All eyes turned. Lauren froze. Daniel didn't. Not immediately. He leaned slightly toward their attorney, whispering something under his breath. A quick calculation. A decision. Then Lauren stood. Her movements were slower now, less certain. She walked to the front of the room, her posture still composed, but the edges of that composure were starting to fray. Your Honor, she said softly. I never intended to hurt my mother. There it was again. Intent. Always intent, as if intent could erase action. Michael remained still watching, waiting. Lauren continued. We were trying to help her, she said. She's been alone for years, managing everything by herself. It's a lot. Her voice trembled slightly, not dramatically, just enough to feel real. And yes, she added, we discussed legal options, but that doesn't mean we were trying to take advantage of her. The words sounded reasonable, measured, carefully chosen. But something was missing. Truth. Michael stepped forward. Mrs. Hayes, he said calmly, can you explain the attempted transfer of $75,000 from your mother's account? Lauren's eyes flickered. Just for a second. It was a mistake, she said quickly. We were reviewing accounts and reviewing. Michael repeated. She hesitated. Yes. Without her knowledge. Another pause. I thought I had the authority through the power of attorney. The forged one. Michael nodded slightly. And how did you come to believe that authority was valid? Lauren swallowed. Because it was signed. By whom, he asked. She didn't answer immediately, because she couldn't. Because any answer she gave would lead back to the same place. Michael didn't press. He let the silence stretch again. Then, let's clarify something, he said. Did you witness your mother signing that document? Lauren's hands tightened. No. Were you present when it was notarized? No. Then on what basis did you accept it as valid? Lauren's breath caught slightly. I trusted Daniel, she said. The room shifted again. Not as sharply as before, but enough, because now the direction of the blame had changed. All eyes moved to Daniel, and for the first time since this began, he stood, not calmly, not confidently, but deliberately. Your Honor, he said, his voice controlled but tighter than before. This is being misrepresented. I handled the documentation process, yes, but everything was done with the intention of protecting Mrs. Moore. Protecting. Always protecting. Michael tilted his head slightly. Then perhaps you can explain the notarization, he said. Daniel hesitated. Just a fraction too long. It was processed through a third party, he replied. A licensed notary, Michael asked. Yes. Name. Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't recall. You don't recall the name of the individual who validated a legal document granting you and your wife authority over Mrs. Moore's assets. Daniel's composure slipped. I handle multiple documents. Michael stepped forward. Then allow me to assist your memory. He turned toward the clerk. We would like to call our next witness. The door at the side of the courtroom opened, and a man stepped inside, middle-aged, nervous, uncertain, the kind of person who did not belong in a courtroom but had been brought there anyway. The notary. Daniel's face changed, not subtly, not gradually, instantly, because he recognized him, because he knew what was coming. The man took the stand, raising his hand as he was sworn in. Michael approached. Please state your name for the record. Eric Lawson, the man said quietly. Mr. Lawson, Michael continued. Are you a licensed notary public? Yes. Did you process a power of attorney document for Mrs. Elizabeth Moore approximately 3 weeks ago? Lawson hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Were you present when Mrs. Moore signed that document? The pause this time was longer. He glanced briefly toward Daniel, then back at Michael. No, he said. A ripple moved through the room. Michael didn't stop. Then how was the signature verified? Lawson swallowed. I was told it had already been signed. By whom? Another glance. Another hesitation. By Mr. Hayes. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. Michael's voice remained steady. And you accepted that without direct verification? Lawson's voice dropped. I shouldn't have. No, Michael said quietly. You shouldn't have. The weight of those words settled heavily in the room, because now there was no ambiguity left, no interpretation, no explanation that could soften what had just been revealed. The document was not just questionable, it was compromised, illegitimate, fraudulent. The judge leaned forward slightly, eyes sharp now. Mr. Hayes, he said, do you have anything further to add regarding this testimony? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. Then, no, Your Honor, for the first time since this began. He had nothing left to say. Lauren sat frozen, her face pale, her hands unmoving, because now the truth wasn't something hidden. It wasn't something waiting to be uncovered. It was here, visible, undeniable, and it had come from the one place they couldn't control, someone outside the story they had built, someone who had no reason to lie. Michael returned to his table, his work precise, controlled, complete. He didn't need to push further, because the case was no longer something that needed to be argued. It had been shown, piece by piece, exactly as Margaret had said it would. The pattern, the method, the mistake. And as I sat there watching it all unfold, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Because for the first time since this began, the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. It was theirs to face. After Mr. Lawson stepped down, the courtroom didn't return to its earlier rhythm. It couldn't. Something fundamental had broken. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that couldn't be repaired with words or softened by explanations. The version of the story Lauren and Daniel had brought into that room, the one built on concern and careful language, no longer held together. And everyone knew it. The judge leaned forward, fingers lightly touching the edge of the bench, gaze moving slowly between the parties. "Counsel," he said, addressing Lauren and Daniel's attorney, "do you wish to continue?" The attorney hesitated. Just for a moment. But it was enough. because hesitation in a room like that meant doubt.
"We would request a brief recess, Your Honor,"
he said. The judge considered it, then shook his head. Denied, he replied calmly,
"This matter has progressed sufficiently. I believe we can proceed."
A quiet shift passed through the room, because now there would be no pause, no time to regroup, no opportunity to rebuild what had already fallen apart. Michael stood.
"Your Honor," he said, "we are prepared to conclude."
The judge nodded.
"Proceed."
Michael didn't move immediately. He allowed a breath to pass just enough to let the weight of everything that had been presented settle fully into the room. Then he spoke.
"What we have seen today," he began, "is not a case of overprotection or misunderstanding. It is a pattern."
He walked slowly, deliberately, not pacing, but placing himself where every word would land clearly. A pattern of access gained without full transparency, of authority claimed without proper validation, of decisions made without consent, each phrase precise, measured, final. This court has heard testimony that a legal document was processed without direct verification of the principal's signature. He gestured slightly toward the table.
"It has seen evidence of an attempted transfer of funds from a restricted account without the principal's knowledge."
Another pause. And then, "It has heard in the defendant's own words an acknowledgement of intent to establish control through a legal framework that would override Mrs. Moore's autonomy." The room remained still, not silent in the sense of emptiness, but silent in the way that truth sometimes demands. Michael turned slightly, his gaze moving not to Lauren, not to Daniel, but to the judge.
"Mrs. Moore has not come before this court asking for punishment," he said. "She has come asking for protection."
That word again. Protection. But this time, it meant something different. "She has acted carefully, responsibly, and with restraint," he continued. "She documented what she observed. She sought professional guidance. She took steps to secure her own assets without escalating the situation unnecessarily." He paused, and when it became clear that those steps were not enough, she came here, to the place where truth is tested, where intention meets consequence. Michael's voice softened slightly, but not in weakness, in clarity.
"Your Honor, this is not a case about age," he said. "It is not a case about capacity."
He turned just slightly toward me.
"It is a case about trust."
The word hung there, simple, unavoidable,
and whether that trust has been honored or violated.
He stepped back.
"That is all. No flourish, no dramatics, just finality."
The judge nodded once, then turned his attention to the other side.
"Do you have anything further?"
he asked. Lauren's attorney stood again, but this time there was no confidence in the movement, no certainty in the posture.
"Your Honor,"
he began, "my clients maintain that their actions were taken with the intention of safeguarding Mrs. Moore's well-being."
"Intention. Again."
But now it sounded smaller, weaker. "Because intention without integrity has nowhere to stand. They regret any misunderstanding."
"This is not a misunderstanding,"
the judge said, his voice calm but firm. The interruption landed with quiet authority. The attorney stopped, because there was nothing to argue, nothing to reinterpret, nothing left to soften. The judge turned slightly, his gaze settling first on Lauren, then on Daniel, and finally on me. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decision. "This court finds that the petition for guardianship is not supported by sufficient evidence of incapacity," he said. The words were measured, deliberate. and further finds that the actions taken by the petitioners raise serious concerns regarding the validity of the documentation presented and the intent behind its use. Lauren's shoulders dropped. Not dramatically. Just enough. Daniel remained still, but his jaw tightened, because they understood what was coming. The power of attorney in question is hereby deemed invalid, pending further review. The judge continued. A quiet release moved through my chest. Not relief. Not yet. But something close. And this matter, he added, will be referred to the appropriate authorities for investigation of potential fraud and misconduct. There it was. Not just a loss, but consequence. Real. Unavoidable. The judge paused. Then his voice softened just slightly. Mrs. Moore, he said, looking directly at me, your autonomy remains fully intact. This court recognizes your capacity to manage your own affairs. The words settled over me in a way I hadn't expected. Because they weren't just legal, they were personal. A recognition. A restoration. I nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge inclined his head. You may all be excused. And just like that, it was over. The gavel didn't need to strike. The decision had already landed. People began to move. Chairs shifted. Papers gathered. Voices returned in low, cautious tones. But for a moment, I didn't move. Because I needed to feel it. Not the victory, but the ending. Of something that had begun long before this room. I stood slowly. Michael placed a hand lightly on my arm. You did exactly what you needed to do, he said. I nodded. Margaret stepped closer, her expression steady but warm. You held your ground, she said. I had help, I replied. You made the choice, she corrected. And then I turned. Lauren was still standing near her seat, not moving, not speaking, just there. Daniel stood beside her, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. For a moment our eyes met. No words, no accusations, no explanations. Because there was nothing left to say. The truth had already spoken. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. Because whatever remained between us was no longer something that could be resolved in a courtroom, or with words, or with intention. I turned back and walked out. Not as someone who had won, but as someone who had reclaimed something that should never have been taken. And as the doors closed behind me, one thought settled quietly, firmly, finally into place. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the end of their control. The morning after the hearing, I woke up to silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty, not heavy. Just quiet in the way it used to be before suspicion, before doubt, before every small moment carried the weight of something hidden beneath it. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality settle in slowly. The case was over. The decision had been made. The control they had tried to take was gone. And yet there was no sense of triumph, no overwhelming relief. Because what had been broken wasn't just legal, it was personal, and those fractures don't heal overnight. I got up, made coffee, and walked into the backyard. The oak tree Thomas had planted all those years ago stood exactly where it always had, tall, steady, unchanged. I sat down on the old wooden bench beneath it, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't racing. They were still. Not because everything had been resolved, but because the uncertainty was gone. And sometimes clarity, even painful clarity, is its own kind of peace. Later that morning, Michael called.
"Just checking in," he said. "How are you holding up? I'm
"All right," I replied honestly. There was a pause.
"The investigation will move forward from here," he continued. "It may take time, but the evidence is strong."
I nodded, even though he couldn't see me.
"I understand. And Mrs. Moore,
Yes, you did something very difficult. Not everyone could have done that." I looked out at the yard, at the quiet life I had fought to keep. "I didn't feel strong," I said. "That's because strength doesn't feel the way people think it does," he replied. I let that settle. "Thank you," I said softly. After we hung up, I sat there for a while longer. Then I went inside. Because life, regardless of what happens, continues. The next few days passed slowly, intentionally. I changed the locks, not out of anger, but necessity. I reviewed my accounts again, this time with full clarity, full control. Every document, every access point, everything secured. Margaret stopped by in the afternoon a few days later, carrying a small tin of cookies. "Thought you might need something sweet," she said. I smiled. "Or something normal," I replied. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had begun to unravel and where now things felt steady again. "You'll hear from them," she said after a moment.
"I didn't ask who.
I knew. They always reach out after something like this," she continued. "Sometimes with anger, sometimes with regret." I traced the edge of my coffee cup with my finger. "I don't know what I'll say," I admitted. "You don't have to know yet," she said. "You just have to know your boundaries." Boundaries. A word I had spent most of my life avoiding, because love in my mind had always meant openness, patience, forgiveness. But now, I understood something different. Love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's vulnerability. And vulnerability in the wrong hands becomes a doorway. A week passed before Lauren reached out. Not a call, not a visit, a letter. It arrived in the mail, addressed in her handwriting, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. I held it for a long time before opening it, because I knew whatever was inside would matter. I finally unfolded the paper, smoothing it carefully on the table. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it, but I need you to know that I never set out to hurt you. I thought I was doing what was best for all of us. I let things go too far. I listened to the wrong voice, and somewhere along the way I stopped listening to you. I'm so sorry for that. I don't know if there's a way back from this, but I hope someday you might be willing to talk to me again. Love, Lauren." I read it twice, then a third time. Each word careful, each sentence deliberate, and yet there was something real in it. Not perfect, not complete, but real. I folded the letter slowly, placing it back in the envelope. Not as a rejection, not as acceptance, just acknowledgement. Because forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. And trust. Trust is something else entirely. That evening I sat in the living room, the quiet wrapping around me in a way that felt familiar again. Safe, but different, stronger. I thought about everything that had happened, the slow unraveling, the realization, the choices I had made, the lines I had drawn, and I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about what they had tried to take. It was about what I had allowed myself to protect. My voice, my independence, my right to decide what happened to my life. Those things aren't small. They aren't optional. They are Everything. I didn't know what would happen next, whether Lauren would truly change, whether there would ever be a relationship again. But I knew this. If there was, it would be different. Because I would be different, stronger, clearer, unwilling to ignore the signs I once overlooked. And that didn't mean I loved her any less. It just meant I loved myself enough too. The next morning I woke up early again, but this time I didn't lie in bed. I got up, made coffee, opened the curtains, let the light in, because life doesn't wait for everything to be perfect. It moves forward. And so would I, one step at a time, with open eyes and steady ground beneath my feet. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who test our strength in ways we never imagined. Not always out of cruelty, but out of fear, control, or misguided belief that they know better. But here's the truth I learned. Love should never come at the cost of your voice. Care should never require you to give up control of your own life. And real family respects your boundaries, not just your presence. Standing up for yourself, especially against someone you love, is one of the hardest things a person can do. It feels wrong. It feels painful. It feels like breaking something that was never meant to break. But sometimes, it's the only way to protect what truly matters. If you've ever faced a situation where someone close to you crossed a line where trust was tested, or where you had to choose between peace and self-respect, I want to hear your story. Where are you watching from? What time is it there right now? And tell me honestly, would you have done the same thing if this story meant something to you? Don't forget to subscribe, and stay with me for more stories like this, because sometimes sharing these moments reminds us that we're not alone.